Okay, so I've got my Anderson easel today. I'm painting on a 16 by 20 inch panel. My usual palette of colors, liquid for my medium, odorless mineral spirits, an assortment of brushes. And I've just toned the panel with some burnt sienna. It's nice to have those little bits of orange popping through when you're doing a seascape that's primarily, you know, blues and greens. Here's the scene I'm looking at right here. And I'd like to kind of focus on, you know, some of the sky reflections in the wet sand. I always find that to be pretty challenging. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of make something out of this. And obviously, the majority of the scene is going to be waves, which are constantly moving. So there's a lot of freedom in design. So I'm just going to play around, you know, sketching until I come up with something I like. Okay, so here is the composition. Rocks up towards the top here, not quite on the top third, it's more like the top quarter. I didn't include a lot of the sky because it's just pretty much clear blue skies today, not that much going on. So just a little bit of sky. There are some distant hills here, but the main focus is going to be in this area here. I like the idea of having like the foreground, some energy in the foreground leading the eye into the painting. And I'm not even sure what I'm going to do as far as waves go, but obviously the waves are going to be all in this area here. The value of the water has got to be dark enough so that the white water stands out. So I'm going to probably go with like a mid-tone value for, you know, for the majority of the water. If you have a view catcher, that's a mid-tone value, like neutral gray. You can see that my palette is also about a mid-tone gray, although it's not neutral. It does tend to lean towards green, but that's okay. I'm mostly, you know, using this for the value. If you don't have a palette like this, you can use something like this, and this gives you an idea of where your mid-tones are. You know, your lights and your extreme darks are going to be really easy. It's the values that are in between that are tricky, so it helps to have a gauge like this. All right, I'm going to start out by mixing a color for the sky. I've got titanium white, a little bit of phthalo blue, and ultramarine. And I'm going to keep it light in value, but I want to make sure that I get some decent saturation as well. I'm going to add a touch of odorless mineral spirits to thin it a bit more. And notice how it's not really picking up any of the toned panel. That's because when I tone, you know, I kind of wipe it down as dry as possible. But yeah, it's not even, you know, picking up any of that orange color underneath, even though I'm kind of scrubbing in the color. And at this stage, I'm just, you know, I just want approximate colors and values. And so that, you know, I get the whole panel covered, and then I can start making adjustments. So there's some distant mountains over there. I'm going to exaggerate them. You can hardly see them, but I want to make them a little larger. I'm just mixing right into the sky color here, using that as a gauge for my values, because I want these mountains to be a little bit darker than the sky. And I've gone with more ultramarine and added a bit of this burnt sienna to gray it down. Again, I can adjust these colors later and values if necessary. All right, next I'm mixing a color for the wet sand here, and I'm going with titanium white, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of alizarin crimson, and actually a touch of this burnt sienna to kind of gray it down a bit. And I'm keeping the mix, it's a little bit lighter than a mid value, mixing in some liquid. And I like the idea of having some motion in these strokes. right, so I always stand back to see how it reads. I think some of these strokes here are a little bit too much, like too vertical. So I like the idea that they're horizontal over to the right here, and then gradually get more angled, but not too extreme. Maybe like that. All right, so I'm mixing some color for the water, and I'm using ultramarine blue, titanium white, some yellow ochre, and burnt sienna. And the value of this is actually slightly darker than mid-tone value. I kind of want there to be a big wave, like on the third up here. And I don't want the waves to be too straight. I want them to be kind of irregular. All right, so for the rocks, I'm using burnt sienna and then ultramarine, which makes sort of a dark brownish color, adding liquid as usual. And the key with like any landscapes or seascapes is keeping things irregular so they're not too perfect. That's one of the advantages of working quickly. You're a lot less likely to be careful and, you know, get something that looks too perfect. Okay, so now I've got the panel covered. I'm just kind of experimenting with adding little bits of white water by erasing with my paper towel, just to see if I can come up with a whitewater pattern that's interesting. There's some waves in the distance that, you know, have like sort of a sloped leading edge, and then some of these here, as they get closer, you know, obviously they get a little bit bigger. So that's starting to shape up a little bit. So I've just been playing around with color and paint application, and I like the patterns I'm seeing here, but I do need to add like some white water to break up you know, this area in here. As the waves come in and then the water goes back out, there's like kind of a bright leading edge along the really shallow water. So I need to capture that. That'll sort of help to break up this area. As I've mentioned, I really like the idea of having very irregular waves. When we first start painting waves, oftentimes we'll make them too careful or too, just these like perfect bands, you know, which is just not as interesting. And it's also not as accurate. You know, the waves are just breaking randomly, you know, everywhere. So it gives you a lot of freedom, but it's also challenging. All right, so I've mixed up a dark using burnt sienna and ultramarine, mixed in a little bit of liquid, and just kind of looking for some random darks on these rocks here. And the same thing applies to the rocks. I don't want, you know, there to be like a straight line across here, like there is right there. So this can be broken up by putting some irregular darks in, but then also as I add white water along here, that'll also kind of break up like a straight line like this right here. Kind of like how that's working. So yeah, maybe I'll just leave this and break it up with some white water. Can add some variety of strokes in here too. And then the same applies for the top of the rocks. Some darks in the top of these cliffs here. Okay, now I've mixed up sort of a dark blue-green, and I'm gonna sort of indicate, just again, keeping it random, some of the dark areas under the waves. I'm gonna come over this with, you know, with white. This area has just been rubbed out, so there's no paint on it. But yeah, just some of these little suggestions of dark to kind of further define the waves without, again, without being too careful. That's the key theme here. Okay, so here's what I finished up with. And if you guys have watched my videos for a while, you know that typically I'm after a strong composition and a convincing feeling of light. So first I'll talk about the light. There weren't a lot of shadows to work with in this particular scene because it was basically in direct sunlight. I mean, there are a few shadows like underneath the white water here, and you know, maybe these sort of darker portions of the waves, but for the most part, not a lot of shadows. So I think the luminosity comes from, you know, the warmth in the water in the foreground here. As the water gets shallower, you know, there was more green in the water. It was a kind of warmer colors. And then also the warmth on the rocks here, this sort of orangey brown. As far as composition goes, a pretty simple idea. Obviously, like these strong horizontals up here with the rocks and the hills in the distance. It was basically just more or less like an abstract painting. As you saw, I just kind of erased random spots until I saw a pattern that was appealing. That's one of the challenging things about painting a scene like this, is that the water is really chaotic and sort of unorganized, and if you organize it too much, then it looks lifeless and it doesn't really capture the essence of the scene. So I felt like this was a good balance of, you know, there is a nice arrangement, and yet there is still enough there's enough chaos in there so that it does feel somewhat accurate. All right, so I do my best to include as much of the process as possible, you know, talk about compositional choices I'm making or challenges that I'm facing, sharing color mixes, that sort of thing. I don't often share my state of mind while I'm painting, but I thought it could be helpful to share that with you guys, because I know a lot of people who start plein air painting, you know, it's a very uncomfortable process for them. They feel out of control, overwhelmed, you know, full of doubt, all that stuff. Anyway, what I want to convey is that doesn't go away. I still feel that with every painting. The difference is, I think, what comes with experience is just feeling comfortable in that space, like, and actually even enjoying it. Like, I much prefer plein air painting to studio painting, because I like to be in that place where I'm slightly out of control, and I'm, you know, the outcome is, you know, I never know for sure if a painting's going to work. Yeah, but I enjoy the adventure of that and the uncertainty of it. So I think that's what's changed for me over time. Part of it is that I have confidence that even if I do get myself into a tricky situation, you know, I'll just wipe it off and fix it or whatever. And I think part of what's helped too is I don't worry about whether a painting is going to work out or not. Like, if it fails, it's okay. Or if it doesn't, I hate to call it a failure, but if it doesn't work, I know that I'm going to learn something from that process. And so anyway, I just wanted to convey that to you guys, because I think a lot of, you know, beginning plein air painters may feel like, oh, eventually I'm going to get to a place where it's like, I got this, you know, this is where it's easy or whatever. There are certain elements that get easier. I think I can mix colors faster. I have better, you know, I can kind of come up with a composition faster than I used to be able to. But I'm still always kind of off balance, sort of skating that line between control and chaos. But that's where the magic is. That's where the vitality is. And that's why I love plein air painting, because it's never going to go away. I don't think, no matter how good you get. And I don't want it to go away, because like I said, I think that's where the really great paintings happen, is when you're, you know, slightly off balance and you're not relying on formula, you're relying on your instinct. And yeah, so anyway, as usual, let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you'd like to see some extra videos, there's a Patreon link down below. Last video I posted was sort of a profile of George Bellows, in particular his seascapes that were done, I believe, on Monhegan Island. Anyway, so if that sounds interesting, like I said, Patreon link down below. Other than that, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next video.